Hello everyone. Everyone is talking about these new margin rules by SEBI and how they're going to impact the trading in general. Let us try and understand that what are actually these rules, how do they impact the market, what was the rationale behind putting on these rules by the SEBI. Let's try and solve this riddle with the help of this video. So before understanding that, let us understand what exactly is margin trading. So in the stock market, margin trading refers to the process whereby which individual investors buy stocks that they can't afford to. Margin trading also refers to intraday trading in India, and various stockbrokers provided this services so far. When I say so far, margin trading services were available only till the 1st of September. From the 1st of September, new rules have come into picture. We'll try and break those and understand that what are these new rules and how have they impacted the trading community. So what has changed? What are the new rules and how do they impact the trading in India? We'll try and break down these different rules and the impact of it on the trading community as a whole in a step-by-step procedure. Now, through this conversation, we'll try and understand as to what are these new rules of margin trading, why are they implemented in the market, why the rules had to be changed, breaking down the rules into different patterns as to what are the rules and how are they being put in a phased manner in the market, impacted parties because of these rules, because these rules have been impacting certain parties in a positive way and certain parties are not at all happy with these new rules. And lastly, how does this impact the asset class? When I say asset class, how does it impact the futures trading, options trading, cash market trading? We'll try and break it down for each and every asset quality segment. So let us begin our discussion on this new margin trading rules. So how did this all margin trading come into picture? SEBI, that is the Securities and Exchange Board of India, dished out these new margin rules in a phased manner. If you remember, about a year back, they had given out that 25% margin is the minimum requirement. Then it moved to 50% margin, which was eventually moved to 75% margin. And from today, that is the 1st of September, the new rules have been changed to 100%. We'll try to understand what are these margin rules and which is the price on which this margin has been implemented. The margin rules will impact traders who majorly trade in cash and futures market. This goes without saying because these are the market which are directly impacted by these rules change and we'll try to understand that what is the magnitude of the change. Now say if the margin required to trade any futures contract is 20%, then the whole margin need to be deposited. Earlier you could deposit only a part of this margin also, but now if the margin required to trade any futures contract is 20%, which is also called the peak margin, then you have to pay the whole margin, that is 100%. It will have to be paid off 20%. You can't pay a part of this 20%, you have to pay completely this 20%. Now, why has SEBI done this? Why was the rule change necessary? So this has been done to bring proper risk management in place. Now, when I say risk management, what happened earlier, you could pay only 5%, 10% of the total margin required and trade at a larger scale. Say if on certain day the market became volatile, which means the risk management became difficult. So to understand that situation and to bring forth a balance in that situation, SEBI has brought about these changes in the margin rule. And the best part about this is that SEBI has not instantly put this margin rules. They have been done in a phased manner. So people have been made to get use of this new rule change, and which is how these rules have been implemented in the market. And it is during this time of phased out manner we are seeing a lot of brokers defaulting because they have been not able to keep up with these rules. The brokers which have not been doing ethical practices or which have not been able to get a proper risk management in place, we have been seeing those brokers defaulting in the market. So any positive change which comes in the market always sees the defaulters getting out of the market and the weak parties getting out of the market. Now, why is this trading and brokerage community unhappy about these rules change? We have been seeing that the traders are going on a strike, or brokerage community is saying that we'll go on a strike, or they're saying trying to forge a union which goes against the rules made by the SEBI. Why are they doing this? Why are they so unhappy about it? Volumes and positions for intraday trading will be reduced significantly. I'll tell you what happens if you are trading something at a discounted price. When I say discounted price, supposedly if the price of something is 100 rupees and you have to pay only 5 rupees to trade that, which means there will be more volume to trade that 100 rupee share. But imagine if you had to pay the whole margin required to trade that kind of share. The volume will reduce drastically. It goes without saying that you will have the same amount of money, but you'll be able to buy lesser quantity, which means the volume will be reduced considerably and which will have a direct impact on the brokerage earn. because the more the volume, the more the amount of income which is earned by the brokers. But if the volume is reduced, it will have a direct impact on the brokerage earned, and which is why the trading and the brokerage community is unhappy about these rules which have been brought forth by SEBI. Now let us understand these rules which have been brought forth by the SEBI about the margin trading. What is this 100% margin rule? Say if the share price of a particular share is say rupees 100, does it mean that under the new margin rule you will need to have 100 rupees in your trading account and that will be blocked by the broker while trading? Does it actually mean that? The simple answer to that is no. It doesn't mean that if you have 100 rupees share you need to have 100 rupees. It doesn't mean that the new rules have been applied to the concept of peak margin. Now what is the peak margin? The peak margin is the amount of money which is required to trade a particular share, and this peak margin is generally in the range of 20 to 30% of the market price of a particular share. Say if the share price of a particular share is rupees 100, then under the peak margin rule you need to deposit anything between 20 rupees to 30 rupees with the broker. You don't have to put 100 rupees with the broker, you need to put only 20 to 30 rupees. So this is what the new rules. The new rule has been put forward on the peak margin, not on the value of the shares. The peak margin generally is between 20 to 30%, and these rules have been set forth by the SEBI. We'll understand where do you see this peak margin on the NSE's website. I'll just show you with a demo also. Now under the old margin rules, what happened there was that, say if the price of the share was rupees 100 and the peak margin required was 20 rupees, which is 20% of the price of the share, then the broker would charge only 10% of the peak margin. Basically he'll give a discount on the peak margin also. So and in that case the amount of margin required to trade rupees 100 share would be 10% of peak margin also, because the broker was charging only 10% of even the peak margin, which means only rupees 2 was required to trade 100 rupees share, which means a leverage of up to 50x was sometimes given by the broker. Now the point was this: why would the broker take such a risk? Because if the share price moved significantly, they had a chance of losing money and they would have to ask for more margin to be deposited by the trader or investor. This was simply done to get more volume in the market, and which ultimately meant more brokerage for the brokers. It goes without saying, the more amount of transactions you do, you have to pay higher brokerage, and which is what a major source of income for the brokerage houses. So which is why they took the risk of giving a leverage on the peak margin also, which means the traders were happy and the brokerage house was happy. Why the traders are happy? Because they have to pay only lesser amount to trade a bigger game, and why the brokerage house was happy? Because they are getting more brokerage from the same. So how did this new rule change impact this peak margin or the amount of leverage which someone got out of it? So in the first phase of the new rule, which was 25% of the margin required to be traded off the peak margin, which means that if the share price was rupees 100 and the peak margin required was say 20%, then in that case the margin required will be only 25% of the peak margin, which meant only rupees 5. How do we get rupees 5? Rupees 5 is the 25% of the 20 rupees which was the peak margin to trade 100 rupees share, which means you still got a 20x leverage. Now in the second phase, what you got was this: the amount of margin required was made 50%, which means if the share price is rupees 100, then the peak margin would be 20% and the margin required will be 50% of the peak margin, which meant only rupees 10 was required to trade the 100 rupees share, which means you got a leverage of 10x. Now in the third phase of this new rule, what happened? The SEBI said the margin required is 75%, which means you need to have 75% of the peak margin as a margin in your trading account. So what happened in that case? The amount of margin required was 75% of the peak margin, which was 20 rupees in this case of our example, which means rupees 15 was required to be trading 100 rupees share, which means a leverage of 6 to 7x. Now in the final phase, which is starting from today, which is 1st September 2021, the amount of margin required is 100% of the peak margin, which meant that the peak margin say was rupees 20, then in that case you need to have 20 rupees in your trading account to trade the 100 rupees share, which still gives you 5x leverage. So the leverage has reduced, but we are still getting certain amount of leverage. So this new margin rule has come on the peak margin, not on the total price value of the share. It is only on the peak margin, which has been set forth by SEBI. Now you can see the vast difference here. Under the previous rule of say 10% of peak margin, you got a leverage of almost 50x. But when the rule was changed to 25%, then the leverage was reduced to 20x. Again after 3 months, when the margin required was changed to 50%, then the leverage which you required was 10x. When the margin again further increased to 75%, then the amount of leverage which you got was 6 to 7x. Now, when the margin required has been made 100%, then the leverage which you would be getting is only 5x. That is assuming that the peak margin is 20% of the price of the share. Now, let us find out that how does one see the peak margin or required to trade a particular stock. So all you have to do is visit the website of NSE and you want to see the peak margin of, say, ICICI Bank. You just plug in the ICICI Bank here and you will see something called as VAR, that is the value at risk. If you go down the right hand side, you see a VAR, that is a value at risk, which shows the amount of peak margin, which is 19.13%. So that is, which means if the share price of, say, ICICI Bank is rupees 100, then you need to have a peak margin of 19 rupees 13 paisa to be able to trade that share for trading purpose. This is how you find the simple VAR and which is the amount of peak margin required to trade a particular share. Now let us understand as to which are the sectors which are majorly impacted because of this new peak margin rules. It has to be cash segment trading and the futures trading. Now when we understood the rules earlier, you were getting leverage of almost 50x, 40x, 30x, 20x. But under the new rules, you're going to get the leverage which is only going to be equivalent to peak margin. If the peak margin is 20%, then you'll get a leverage of 5x. If the peak margin is 30%, then you'll get a leverage of 3.3x. So that is how it's impacting the cash market, and even the futures trading will be impacted. Now say if the margin required to trade any futures contract is rupees 2 lakh. Now in the previous rule, by paying only 20% margin, you could just trade this contract by paying rupees 40,000 only, which is 20% of peak margin. But under the new rules, you would be required to put 100% margin, which means you will be requiring rupees 2 lakhs to trade that particular futures contract. So that flexibility of extra leverage has gone out of the market, which is actually making the traders community and the brokerage community unhappy about these new rules. Now, what are the positive thing out of these rules? Everything which is a negative, there has to be a certain amount of positive out of these new rules. So the new and the inexperienced traders will be greatly protected, and the risk will also reduce. I'll explain you how. Supposedly, if you had come in the market with the capital rupees, say 10,000 rupees, and if you had got a, say, 50x leverage, which means you could trade up to, say, 5 lakh rupees in the market. But with only 2% or 3% of the movement, you could lose all the initial 10,000, because that is the amount of actual money which you have. If you have made a loss of rupees 10,000, which means the position will be auto squared off. But under the new rules, if you are giving only 4x, 5x leverage, which means you'll be trading only, say, 50,000 rupees. But with 2 or 3% movement in the prices, you wouldn't lose out all the capital, which means you have more learning time. Anyone who comes new in the market will want to learn with lesser amount of capital, and if you're allowed only to trade only 4x, 5x of your capital which you have, which means you'll have more chances of taking new trades and more learning will happen, which will ultimately reduce the risk for you in the market. So I hope this video and presentation gave you a decent understanding that what are these new rules, how are they impacting the market, why has SEBI brought these new rules in the market, which are the parties who have been impacted in a positive way, negative way, how are these rules impacting the overall margin required to trade. I thank you for your patient hearing, and if you like our content, please comment, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in future videos of financial education. Thank you so much.